Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. Before we get into it with our guest here today, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Robbi Jenkins on the podcast. She's coming to us from North Carolina, where, again, I'm not liking her particularly well at the moment because this is getting close to December in Minnesota. So, enjoy it while it lasts before we just get into the eternal hellscape of winter. But before I just bring this entire mood down, Robbi, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
See, I saved the weather question for the summertime, so I'm not even gonna, touch it now. But you're an artist, lifestyle contest prep coach, Latosaurus Flex on Instagram. We already talked about before we started how that name came to be. But just to get things started, why don't you give us your backstory on what inspired and motivated you to get in shape and how that led to where you're at right now?
Yeah, so I'm actually from a really, really small town in Illinois, rural cornfields, one stoplight, soybeans, like actual Illinois. Didn't have a background in sports. Actually, don't come from a family that really does anything with health. Like, for instance, I'd never even had like a sweet potato or an avocado until I was in college. Um, so everything about the bodybuilding journey didn't actually happen until after I was 18 years old and in college. I didn't even start lifting until I think it was after my senior year of school. My best friend's dad actually was super into bodybuilding. So I kind of talked to him about that a little bit, like when I was in junior high and high school. Uh, but we just kind of left it at that. Now I look back and I'm like, huh, foreshadowing. But I was determined to get out of my small town. And so I come from a family where it was like they made enough to where I couldn't get financial aid. And so my parents told me, if you want to go to this community school and stay here, we can give you up to like 2 grand to help get you started. And they've got like a really good nursing program. And me and nursing, I'm like, no, like I have no desire whatsoever. And they're like, so if you want to do something else, you're gonna have to figure it out. So I did. Um, I ended up going to Eastern Illinois University and I applied for a 4-year scholarship through the ROTC program. And so that paid for the entirety of my college, aside from like some fees, which I was able to pay through like part time jobs and stuff. But that was kind of the start of me working out because I knew that I was going to have to work out to do stuff in the military. I'd kind of picked up running a little bit, which now I look back at and I'm like, ugh, why would I do that? And I mean, I'm talking like I would go on like 4 or 8 mile runs my junior year of high school for fun. And now I'm just like, that sounds miserable.
Oh,
Like
so
they'll
you're one of
never
you're one of
catch
those
me.
people. Good God.
Oh, not anymore, but I was.
No,
Um,
but that doesn't leave you. You always just have that dormant in your system, I think. So it's like it's gonna rear its ugly head one of these days. That's what I found from talking to some of these guests.
oh man, I hope not. I tried doing a half marathon when I was in college, and I was like, never again, never
10 years
again.
from now, we're gonna see Robbi doing like Tough Mudders on Instagram or something like that, and then we're like, oh yeah, I guess it happens.
I feel like obstacle course races are a little like you got something to break it up that's interesting, but like straight flat running, if you see me running any distance, something has gone severely wrong. But anyway, I was getting ready to go into my freshman year and I didn't really know what to expect. So my best friend's dad had this little home garage gym and I wanted to go lift, but I didn't know what to do or how to do it. And then he also had these like stacks of magazines of like muscle and fitness and all this stuff. And I remember being like any other teenage girl, I always had like self image issues and stuff like that, and was always focused on weight and being skinny. And I remember seeing this woman, Jacqueline Kostelic. I think she's really big in the CrossFit community. But I saw like an interview on her, and she's this like little 5'3", like 135-pound girl, but she is like a beast, and she is lifting all this crazy amount of weight and doing all this stuff. And I was like, ooh, that, like, that is what I want to. Like that is what I want to be like more than just like some skinny, scrawny person. Like, I actually want to be strong. Um, so my friend's dad was like, uh, Chris, her older brother, his best friend Chase is out there. Like, he doesn't bite, and if he does, just bite him back. And he'll like just go out and ask him, and he'll show you what to do. And so that was the first time I ever lifted. And I remember doing pullovers with 5 pounds and thinking it was insanely difficult. So like I didn't pop out an athlete or anything like that. Like 18 years old, 5 pound pullovers were hard. Um, but I did fall in love with it. I started to really like strength training way more than running or anything else. And then when I got into my freshman year, they had this goofy little team in ROTC, and they called it Ranger Challenge. It's like the cheesiest thing on the planet, but it was like the closest thing to a sport, um, like in that little area. And so I wanted to try out for it. Well, at the school that I went to, I guess I don't think they had ever had a girl compete, or they'd only had one, but never on like a mixed team. And so I've always been kind of competitive. I've asked my parents because I've had people ask me if I was ever athletic. And when I tell them no, they're like, I feel like you wasted a lot of athletic potential. And so when I asked my parents about it later, they were like, you were so competitive that we thought if we pushed you into sports, like it would just ruin it for you. So we never did. So I was instead like the band nerd and all of that stuff, which kind of comes to play like into the artistic stuff of what I do now. So I'm grateful for it still. But yeah, I tried out for the team, and those guys were determined to get me to quit. It was like they zeroed in on all the girls, and they were ruthless. But I stuck it out, and eventually, like, really started enjoying getting faster and getting stronger. And even though it was still like some sort of the army, we trained like idiots now in hindsight. But I started showing up a lot of the guys, and actually got picked as like a first string for like their mixed team. And so we went and did that, um, got like record times with all the other teams. And the thing was with the mixed teams was they may have a girl in it. But the year I went to compete, I was the only person on like the 5 man team that actually had a girl. And we were kicking their asses. And the thing was is you were only as fast as your slowest person. So that that kind of again kind of set the stage of I really liked being competitive, and I liked keeping up with the guys. And so even when I would train in college, I think then that would have been 2011, 2012. So I think that was around the time Daniel and Bailey started getting bigger, and that was when it still wasn't really accepted for women to have a lot of muscle, and it really wasn't a thing yet for women to lift like men. But I loved it. I didn't want to be upstairs in the aerobic section with all the other girls. Like, I didn't want to be on the ellipticals. Like, I wanted to be in the downstairs area with all the other frat bros doing what they were doing, but training everything. And so originally I was going to be a dietetics major, hated chemistry. I think more so I was just immature and didn't appreciate learning. So if I went back and did it now, I'd actually probably be really good at it. I find this stuff fascinating now. But I'd switched over to exercise science and sports studies, and then decided I wanted
Thank
to
God,
do.
because I'm currently seeing someone who was a dietitian and she majored in it. This is the conversation that we have all the time. Are you sure you want to eat that? And then I'm just like, I haven't yet, everyone, but if it pops off, that that's the reason why. But no, I'm just kidding. But she's lovely, but that almost every time I go to eat, and it's like, oh, I want some extra fry or something like that. And she's like, you sure you want that? And it's like, oh, I hate you deep down, but I do like you. So no, I just had to put that in there. So thank God you chose, in my opinion, at least the right path.
Yeah. And I can even remember getting some resistance from my parents because they were like, exercise science, like, what are you going to do with that? You're never going to get a real job that makes real money or whatever. Which to me, even then, I was always like, well, I'd rather do something I'm passionate about. If I'm passionate about it, like the money will come eventually. But like if I do something that I'm miserable in, no matter how much money I make, I'm still going to be miserable. Like that's kind of something that was deep seated in me ever since I was little. Um, so went through the exercise science and sports study program, and one of my favorite instructors had seen me training down with the guys. And I think finally my sophomore year into freshman, early sophomore year, he approached me when I was in the gym, and he was like, I see you down here training with the guys and just the way that you train. He's like, have you ever thought about competing in bodybuilding? And at that point, I hadn't really honestly heard of it. I was just like, no. And he was like, well, you like to train, you're very competitive, and like you have the discipline to do it, I think you'd be good for the sport. So I kind of put my foot in the water for a few years in college. Um, when it came to the Army, I actually ended up doing something absolutely not related to my major at all. I ended up going into aviation and flying helicopters for a couple years. So while I was in flight school, I still liked bodybuilding, but it's just like I don't have the time to dedicate to it. And again, I really don't think it was that. I just don't think I had the maturity to stay disciplined while flight school. Like it's tough, but it's also like a big party at the same time. And so I walked away from bodybuilding for a while, and then 2019, the itch just would not go away. And so it's like, all right, I'm ready to get back into it. So
How is flight school a big party? Because hopefully you guys aren't flying after partying.
no, at least not within 12 hours. But it's so like you go through and it's kind of just like a normal school, like Monday through Friday. So we would have academics either in the morning or afternoon, and then whichever we weren't in academics, we would either have like flight simulators or actual flying. And so that would be your Monday through Friday, and then you would have weekends off. And then we were in like southern Alabama, so hour and a half drive from Panama City Beach, Destin, all of those places. And so we would all make our way down to Panhandle. And if we didn't feel like going there, I mean, people would throw like their college like house parties and stuff on the weekends and whatever too. So yeah, just not. I was more wanting to do that than I was wanting to actually like zone in and give bodybuilding the focus that it needed.
Trust me, we've all been there.
Oh yeah.
So, when you were getting started, what was one thing about the sport that really surprised you the most? Because there's so many things about this lifestyle that most people in the general public don't know about. So, when they get started, it just really shocks them how different the perception of the sport is as opposed to what the sport really is.
So I honestly think I had the perception that everybody has of the sport. I think I kept that even when I was a beginner, probably until after I started competing again. Um, I think I didn't even really fully grasp like the fullness really until 2021 when I just decided that I no longer wanted to compete in figure and I wanted to go into physique. And that's when I kind of embraced it as like a holistic thing, not just something that was like a physical thing. And then if anybody had been like following me for a while, they can probably see the difference of like what I brought to the stage this past year versus what I had in previous seasons. Um, but yeah, I did like a pretty bro style approach. Like when I was in college, I think out of my first three coaches, the one that I had first was the best just because she was a woman and she knew how like women's body worked. But when I competed in 2019 and 2020, I had coaches that had a very my my coach in 2019. He was very much like, "This is my way. I have like the secret recipe to getting on stage, and you have to do everything as I say, how I say it, or like you're not going to get to the point that you need to be, and whatever." Um, and where I got really like, or I really started to question it, is I'm one of those people that especially when it comes to something like that and it plays so much into my health, um, I'm not going to give you my trust super easy. And I'm going to question everything that you do. And it's not out of a lack of respect, but it's because I want to understand what we're doing and the why of it. Just because, one, it was a field that I was in at school. I mean, exercise science, they still cover like nutrition basics and different things like that. And they also cover training and stuff, even at like still a very superficial level. Like if you really want to dig into the weeds, it's kind of on you after um, for like continued self study and stuff. But anytime I would go to ask them a question about why we were doing something, it was, well, because I said so and because of this. And that's when I realized, like, oh, like, I don't think you actually know what you're doing. I think you have like a cookie cutter template of a plan that you're giving to every single person, no matter
Welcome to
what.
90% of coaches out there.
Yep. And so I had that in 2019. And so I think by my second show, I did three shows with him. And by my second show, I was like, I'm not going to stay with this guy for the long haul, but I am going to I'll finish my season with him, and then I'm going to leave and look for somebody else. So that's exactly what I did. And then I found a new coach in 2020, and he was a bit better. He had a little bit more of like a rounded nutritional approach. But he still didn't have like the full holistic approach to it. And then even with like blood work and stuff like that, like he didn't go into as deep of a dive as my current coach does, who I'm pretty much ride or die with. Like this dude, it's either I'm gonna get to the Olympia as a pro with him one day, or I'm not gonna get there at all. Because I don't think there's another person on the planet that could probably coach me as well as he does. But yeah, this I did 2 years with my second coach. Missed my pro card in figure by a point at Junior USA's. And so we had the qualification. So we decided 2021, we were just going to do North Americans, and that was it. So we were going to get ready for that. One of the biggest problems that was on me was I didn't stay in touch with them to properly reverse. And then I didn't really respect what a true off season was. And so I still hadn't fully grasped that like prep isn't the end all be all of bodybuilding. That's where all of the hard work comes to light. That's not when all of the hard work is done. And so when we were going into North Americans, I think we did a little bit of a longer prep. I think we did 15 weeks, which was at that point the longest prep I had done. But even then, I think I was about 6 weeks out to my show, and I was doing everything that I could to a T as he told me. And food was getting lower, cardio was getting higher, and still things just didn't make sense. Like he had me in the gym 6 days a week. The amount of sets that he had me doing was super, super high, and they were all working sets. It wasn't like you're going to do 5 sets, but your first couple are working up to your actual working sets. And he had a very much of a do more approach. He didn't really do refeeds or anything like that. And what was happening was like I was just tanking. Like my cortisol levels were getting so high that we weren't doing anything to mitigate that. And so I was stalling. I was hitting a point where we are now fighting my body instead of working with it. And at that point, I had already met my now current coach. I think we'd known each other for like a year. We went to the same gym. I talked to him a little bit off and on about like what he did and his perspectives on stuff. But I got to a point where I was just like, I wasn't improving. And I remember I had reached out to my coach and I was like, hey, like I'm not moving. The scale's not moving. I'm not losing. And I'm literally doing everything that you are telling me to do. I'm doing all the cardio. I'm checking all the boxes. But like all that's happening is I'm feeling run down and I feel like I'm on the brink of death. And he just told me, well, this is where you just have to dig deep and push harder. And if anybody knows me, and my current coach will attest to this, most of the time, I don't need somebody to tell me to push harder. I need somebody to pull a freaking e-brake on me and be like, Robbi, you need to slow down and like give yourself a little bit of a break. And so I was in a training session with a client. At that point, I think I was on my way out of the military. Was starting to build like a personal training business at the gym that I went to. And I was at a session with a client. Luckily, she was EMS, so she could kind of see the signs too. But I think we only got halfway through her training session, and I just started turning pale, and then I started getting green, and I started getting nauseous. And I'm not somebody who gets nauseous on a regular basis. Like there's some people that I think can get set off pretty easy. Like I have one of my sisters is like that. I'm not that person. Like if I'm at the point where I'm about to throw up, something's wrong. And so we had to cut her training session early. And I rushed home as fast as I could because I knew I was going to throw up, but I've got an ego and I didn't want to throw up in front of anybody. I didn't want to pull off on the side of the road. And I barely made it into my driveway and just managed to open up my driver's side door. And I just threw up everything I'd eaten, which was not much. And I mean, it was all over my door, all over my shoes. And then when I got out, like standing up and just walking to my door felt like I had tried to run a half marathon without training for it. And so I was just like, this isn't right. Like I shouldn't, like I know that you're gonna feel bad, but like we're 6 weeks out. I'm not as lean as I should be. And like, there's just something that's wrong. And so I reached out to my current coach and I just kind of gave him a heads up. I was like, hey, I'm 6 weeks out. Something's really wrong. I'm not sure whether to pull out or if it comes down to it, would you be willing to coach me the rest of the way into the show? And he was like, I'd be willing to do it, but he was like, think about it, think about what you want to do, and then make sure you disconnect with your current coach first. And then if you're still wanting to do the show, he's like, let me know. And then we'll talk. So I took a couple days and I didn't go like crazy and get like cookies or anything like that, but I would get like plain like low sugar like Cheerios or checks or something like that, and basically took a couple days and would like eat some carbs with every meal and got to where like my brain actually felt like it could function. Um, and then on that Monday, I had an appointment. I was getting medically discharged for like mental health reasons, and I remember I had this pharmacologist who had asked me if I actually thought that bodybuilding was good for me with the condition that I had, and that just like it really struck me the wrong way because the way that he said it, it was just like, you're really trying to paint me into this like victim or like box me into this victim mentality. And like it pissed me off. And so I remember I got to my car, I like broke down and cried for probably a good 5 to 10 minutes, just trying to figure out what to do. And then thinking like, crap, like maybe he's right. Like maybe I shouldn't do this sport. And then there was just something in me that was like, no, like there is a better way to do this. And like, you're not a victim. You're not a quitter. Like, you're not the first person that's had mental health problems and then still was like successful in whatever they want to do. It's just, you need the right person to guide you like along the journey. And then it's like, you got some stuff you need to work on.
Mental health problems in the Army? Never heard of that before.
Or bodybuilding.
Yeah, well,
Never heard of that
bodybuilding.
before.
That's bodybuilding. If you don't have it, you're an outlier. So it's just like that's what you should put on your Instagram page. Like, I don't have any mental health problems, and then people would be like, psychopath here. You really have to be psychotic to not have mental health problems and be a bodybuilder. But hey, that just goes with the territory.
Yeah, it's like the mental health problems is usually what drives us into the sport.
I've been looking for forever
But
for that golden unicorn, just like a Ned Flanders that bodybuilds. I haven't found him yet, but once I do, I think I'm gonna stop doing this podcast. I'm gonna be like, okay, I found him. I found the diamond in the rough, everyone. But yeah, you have to have a certain mindset to be in the sport. Absolutely. And I mean, it's just with the amount of stuff that you have to do in this sport and what it requires mentally. You have to have a certain type of personality.
Yep. But yeah, so I kind of sucked it back up, told myself like, nope, I know this is what I want to do. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what I love to do. It's just, there's something in me that's going about this the wrong way. On both ends, on like a personal end and then just on like a coaching end. So I reached out to the coach that I still have today and was like, all right, broke up with my old coach. Like, if you're in, I'm in, let's do this. And we finished out the show. Still a disaster. I didn't have like a great support system for it. And like I said, like my mental health was a complete wreck. And I don't care who you are or how long you're in the sport of bodybuilding. Like, if you're doing it as a mental nutcase, hoping it's going to solve something, at some point you're going to hit a wall and like everything's going to crash down on you. And I think North Americans, like that was my wall, was like hitting that wall. So we got to North Americans. I was looking pretty decent, like not good enough to win, but decent to be in like probably like top 3 for my class. And I got into a fight. I was married at the time. I got into a huge fight with my ex-husband, and that stressed me out so bad that the like cortisol cascade, I shit you not, overnight it looked like I gained like 15-20 pounds just with water weight. And so we knew like the day going into the show, like I was so anxious and stressed out, I couldn't get food down. And then my coach even told me, he was like, look, if you end up throwing up, I'm pulling you off the stage. Like, you're not even going to step on there. And so I was determined, like at that point, I'd already flown out. I'd put all this work into it. My ass was going to get on the stage. Even if I lost, I was going to get up there. And so I did, got dead last, and then walked right off. And I don't even think we showed up because we knew. Like, I don't even think I showed up for finals that night because everything was a mess. Um, but it was great because it was like the kick in the ass that I needed, and then it was also kind of the kick in the ass my coach at the time needed too, for both of us to kind of get set on a journey, which really started pretty much right at that point to come back a lot better for this year.
And I mean, you were 1 point away from getting your pro card. What was that like? Because that I can't imagine being that close.
Ah, yeah, it sucked. That sucked so bad. But again, in hindsight though, like I'm so glad because looking at it now, especially with all the stuff I've went through the last couple years, I wasn't ready. Like I wasn't ready to be a pro. With where I was at, like mentally, the external validation I was looking for, like becoming a pro, it would have just set me up to where, I mean, it would have been a disaster because then it's like all this unnecessary pressure I would have been putting on myself. Like the best thing that could have happened to me was not going pro that year because I just wasn't like my mental health, my character, just who I was as a person was just not equipped to be, just was not equipped to be a pro. Just was not. So it sucked, but I'm glad that it happened. I'm glad that I didn't get it because I wasn't ready.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. And I always ask this to every single guest their first time on. What is one area of your physique that really, really took off when you started training that you don't have to train as much? And then what's been one area that you've just had to drag behind this entire time?
Oof. Um. So I'd say it would be a cross between either my glutes or my back. I feel like either one of those, especially like with women's physique, you can always bring up anything and everything. Like those girls just keep getting bigger and bigger and come in more conditioned. But I feel like I can sneeze and my back or my butt's gonna grow. And I'll have people, especially like with my glutes, they overpower the rest of my legs so much it's not even funny. And people will ask me like, what is my glute routine? And I'm like, I don't have one. It's just like I just know how to activate them when I'm doing exercises. So, but yeah, I would say those two.
What's one area that you just like can never grow no matter how hard you try?
Yeah, I can't get my adductors. And that's something that we're trying to work on a lot this year. Hamstrings was another one that I've struggled with, which they're coming up more, but adductors, man, they just
Yeah, that is one that we hear about, quite a bit. And what was the main reason behind going from figure to physique? Was it just because you were getting too big, or you didn't like the Like, what was the backstory behind that?
So it was personality. So I'm not the kind of person I just like beauty pageant style kind of stuff and me just don't go well together. My favorite part of bodybuilding is not getting my hair done and getting my makeup done and all that stuff. I actually hate it. Like absolutely hate it. And then when I was competing at North Americans, I had like the side of my head shaved, had like the face piercings and stuff. I think I even had like my eyebrow pierced too. And I remember going in because Kenny Wallich, I worked with him. And when we went through posing before I went on stage, he was like, when you do your hair, you need to cover this side. The judges aren't going to like that. Like the stuff on your face, you need to take out. Like that's just not good for figure. And when I completely lost, it was like not only did I lose, but I also showed up as somebody that just wasn't me. Like I hid all the things about myself. Like I liked my piercings, I liked my style, and then I told my coach, and just the way that I trained too. Like I trained in a way that I was still going to grow muscle, and I'm still a baby in the sport. So I had a few people tell me that I should do women's physique. Obviously, like they don't really care about tattoos and piercings and more like edginess. You see a lot of that in women's bodybuilding. So I had a few people that kind of like put it in my ear. And then I remember seeing a women's bodybuilder at a Tampa Pro show. Um, I saw her posing, and like her posing was what kind of lured me in to the actual like artistic side of posing for the first time. I think her name's Janine Lankowski. I think it
The
is.
best poser in the world by far. Yeah, like everyone always talks. She wins all the best posing awards and everything. Yeah, I've had her on. She's awesome. But everyone that I've talked to says that like, and she makes up her routines too. Like she doesn't even like plan them,
Hmm.
and that's just how good she is.
Yeah. And so I saw her at the Tampa Pro, and I remember watching her gave me goosebumps. And up till that point, I think any posing routines I had seen were very just like cheesy and kind of blocky, and it didn't flow with the music. And I was just like, I don't know, like I don't know if I could get up and do that. Like it just seems like, I don't know, just something about it just seems kind of cringy to me. But when I saw her pose, I was like, oh, I can see the artistry in it and how she timed everything to the music, and it all made sense. And then just how it made me feel. I was like, that, that is what I want to do. And I ended up bumping into her after the show, and her and I were talking, and she asked me what division that I was in. And I told her figure. And she was like, have you thought about WPD? And I was like, yeah, I have. And I was like, but I just don't know. Like, I don't know if I have the genetics for it or, and at that time, I still thought I was going to have to do like a massive amount of drugs to like get to that size, which like I've learned since is not the case. Um, and she was like, you need to switch. She was like, you need to go to WPD. You'll fit in a lot better here. And so I was like, well, all right. So when I walked off stage at North Americans, that was like another decision I made too was, hey, we're gonna do WPD. And like when we show back up, like I'm showing back up as me and they can take it or leave it. So
What is your relationship like with posing, and do you think that your background in figure going to physique helped at all with your posing, just because you knew how to like get certain muscle groups working, or was it still just such a brand new style of posing that it didn't really help to have that experience in figure?
no, I don't really think that it helped all that much. I mean the quarter turns and stuff are pretty much the same, just without heels, thank God. But and that's always a good foundation for any other kind of pose that you want to do, especially if you want to do something more classic. But it was stepping into a completely different world when I started posing. And one of the things that I'm happy that I did was when I started posing, I put videos on Instagram. So like you can see from the very beginning of where I started in like early January 22 to where I've gotten now. And it's like a night and day difference. But no, I didn't have a dance background. Um, I don't really feel like it helped me that much at all. Like I look back at those videos and they were if terrible. Um, but no, what I loved about it is it almost became not even almost, it just became like a mode of therapy for me. So I had all these demons and stuff I was still battling when I stepped off stage in 21. And I grew up in a family where we don't talk about stuff, and like they still don't really believe in therapy. Um, they kind of think it's a lot of like hokey pokey kind of deal. And then like my dad was a preacher, and so they kind of have the give your problems to Jesus and like he'll take care of it. And I've always been kind of like a balance of both. It's like I feel like, you know, if God's created everything, he's also created the minds that created therapy. So just as much as like he wants me to give stuff to him, he probably also wants me to use like what he's given us on this earth to help us out. Um, so yeah, I just never really felt like I had a voice to really express how I felt with different things that I was going through, whether it was things that I felt in childhood or some of like the traumatic stuff I went through in like early adulthood. And I've always connected to songs and music. Like that's where kind of like the band geek in me starts to come back full circle. And I've always loved music. And so when I started posing, I would just find songs that I really related to. And then when I started being able to connect memories that I hadn't actually sorted through very well and use movement and just the emotions from those to kind of navigate through it, I started realizing that I was starting to heal just as a person. And so posing not only became like a way to showcase my body, but it became an expression and like an avenue for me to have a voice and express like the parts of myself I've never really known how to express before.
No. And let's be honest, you're not the average looking woman. Like if you were to go out in public dressed the way you are right now, I mean, you are going to draw people's attention just because it's like sort of being a mini celebrity where it's just human nature when they see something that's not of the normal to just be fascinated by it. What has that been like? And has it gotten easier for you as you've gotten more and more into the sport, or still sometimes like people's reactions to you, does it still kind of just drive you crazy and you're just like, I can't believe I'm getting this much attention?
No, I honestly I don't really pay attention to it. Most of the time where I become aware of it is either when I'm like with my boyfriend or with friends that aren't used to like seeing the reactions, and then they'll bring it up and then ask me basically the same thing that you just did. And if it wasn't for them bringing it up at this point, I don't really pay attention. And I think it's because I do understand that I don't look like everybody else in any way, shape, or form. Like I've got tattoos, I've got piercings, I've got more muscle than 99% of women. So like if I'm out in public, the general person is like they're just gonna look. They're gonna be curious. So it doesn't bother me or offend me or anything. I mean, if anything, it makes me feel like I'm doing something right because I'm doing something that I love to do, and it's something that kind of just sets me apart from any other person. So,
I mean, a lot of people when they do look at bodybuilding, they just look and they get a little bit familiar with it. They look at all the pain and suffering that is required to be in this sport, especially when it comes to preps and off seasons and everything that entails. I bet you probably get asked a couple times, like, why you do this? Why do you put yourself through this? Because a lot of people look at it and they're just like, okay, this is just pain and suffering that just is needless at this point. But what is your response to that whenever people might ask you, like, Robbie, why do you put yourself through this?
well, every time I go through it, especially this last prep, because this last prep we did 6 months and we did no free meals whatsoever. So my coach would do refeeds, but it was refeeding anything that was already on my plan. So for 6 months, I didn't go out to eat if it wasn't written down as something to eat or like a substitution, which my coach is amazing at putting in variety. Like I was eating fruit up till 3 weeks out of the show before he pulled that. Um, yeah, I stuck to it. I stuck to it to its heat. But just being able to stay disciplined and structured like that, you always learn something about yourself. And I think this last entirety of the season, not just the prep, but everything from 2021 when I stepped off stage until I got back on stage this year in 23. Um, I think I've learned more about myself and probably found like who I genuinely am as a person and who I want to be than I ever have. And without putting myself through that process, I don't think I would ever get there. So that's why.
Yeah, just the mental journey that this requires is, I mean, your mental strength is 100 times stronger than any other, part of your body. But we gotta talk about post-show blues and all that stuff that entails because most people do not understand. First of all, that they think a lot of times that like you have your stage look a lot longer than you do. They don't realize that this is something that is not 24/7. But how have you dealt with post-show, and has it gotten easier for you as your career's gone on, or is it still just as hard as it was the first time?
Um, so yeah, post blues is it never goes away. It's one of those things that I've accepted. I think this year so far has been the best that I've handled it, and there's still days where I struggle with it. I mean, even this past week being home, finally, um, like it's stuff that my boyfriend can see. Like I come back home and like my face isn't gaunt anymore, and like I still look fit, like to the normal person. Like I still look in really good shape. But after being so lean that like I've got striations throughout my glutes, like putting 15 pounds on still feels like putting 15 pounds on, no matter like what body fat level you're at. So it's something that you have to adjust to. But I think one of the things that I've tried to do is I constantly remind myself that, if I want to progress in sport, I have to grow. And I can't grow if I'm constantly in a deficit. And I can't grow if my hormones are not optimal. And they're not going to be optimal as a woman if I'm single digit body fat. So it's like I have to go through back through all these things because where I was at on stage, it wasn't sustainable. Right after the show, I stayed in Orlando for the week for the Olympia week. And then I went to Australia for 2 weeks and hung out and collaborated with Pete Hartwig. And we were filming at the end of that trip. So that also helped me reverse out because I knew I was going to be on camera. So even though I was still able to like enjoy foods and stuff in Australia that I wouldn't get here, it helped keep me level headed to not go off the deep end. So I'd say a mixture of those. So when I got back from the trip, I think three weeks post show, 4 weeks post show, and I was only up like 12 pounds. So that's actually like a reasonable amount of gaining weight back. Um, we got plenty of movement and stuff in Australia. There's like a lot of stuff to kind of keep my mind off the fact that it was post show. So all my hormones and stuff are probably at their worst trying to rebound. Like I was in a setting where I was around people who did it, who were in the sport and who understood it. And then even getting back, it was something like my boyfriend and I talked about. He's insanely like amazing and supportive. And so anything I want to do with bodybuilding, he'll support. But even just telling him, like, hey, the hardest part for me isn't actually the prep, it's coming out of prep. And like, I'm going to gain weight and you're going to see me get really self conscious. And what I'm going to need from you is to just kind of help give me some affirmations that, like,
Oh no,
I'm
pile it
okay.
on her. Call her a fat pig. Do all this other stuff. Just really make it as worse as possible. Do not support her anyway. Just make her feel as worse as she's ever felt. Do not do that, everyone. She's saying what she wants, but no, being that I can read women perfectly, I know that deep down she wants the exact opposite. So capitalize on that.
But yeah, he's been insanely amazing since I've gotten back this last week too. Of just like you look healthy and you're so much more vibrant, and that's helped a lot too. Where he'll see me start to get in my head, and he's just like, just like look, like the. He's like, even the fact that you tell me like if you were to gain another 10 pounds, it would be hard for you to want to pose for a while because like you're ashamed. He was like, that's insane. He was like, I understand that like that's how you feel, but he was like, you still look incredible. And he's like, I just wish, I wish you could see how I see you and other people see you right now. And so just having like those kind of voices in my head since I've gotten back too has been uh super incredibly helpful.
Yep, that's why the saying goes. I mean, you basically sign a deal with the devil when you become a bodybuilder, where you're never going to be good enough. You're never, no matter what you do, it's always going to. I mean, like I said, I talked to Andrea Shaw, and she's just won the Olympia for what, like the third or fourth time, and she would still say like, "Oh, I have so many things I need to improve on." It's like when you even reach even that level to still be saying that. I mean,
Hmm.
it goes with the sport. But if someone were to walk up to you and say, Robbi, we made the decision. You can change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding, and everyone would go along with it. What would be one thing you'd like to see changed?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I would like to see more people just promote the entirety of the journey and really like let that be what they put on the pedestal and not so much the trophy or the placement or the IFBB letters that go before your name or whatever. Because I think what happens is, and at least what happened for me, is once I embrace like the fullness of it, um, you know, it allowed me to improve my relationships even while I was on prep. It allowed me to improve my faith while I was on prep. It made me just a better person in general, not just an athlete. And then even when I didn't get the placement at the amateur O that I was hoping for, I actually was able to walk away from the stage and be like, I'm still proud of what I did. And like, it's okay. Like in time, I'll get there. I just have some more work to do. And I think when we get so focused on, well, if I become an IFBB pro, then like this will happen. Or if I get this placing, like I'll feel validated by this. Um, I think even when you get those things, if you haven't embraced the journey of it and really showed like the ups and downs in it and like why the journey of it is so important, then people get to that spot and they're still super empty and they're still missing something. And it's because they're so focused on the wins and the notoriety that they're missing out on all the growth that they can potentially have if they really like dive into it.
I've always thought that's one of the bigger reasons why a lot of people, when they get started in the sport, they don't last that long, is because they aren't aware of just how grueling and taxing the whole journey is, as opposed to just the end result that they see constantly. And they just think, oh, if I put in so much work, I'll be able to look like that. But they don't understand just how much of the work actually there is and how, grueling it can be at times. But When we do have you on in a year, I would love to talk to you again and just, see where you're up to. Where would you like to be at in a year? What are some goals that you have with your, bodybuilding career or just your goals in average everyday life? Where would you like to be at a year from now?
So a year from now, I'd like to be through at least one successful off season. As of right now, the plan is we're going to take 2 years. So we're guessing I've got about 10 pounds of muscle that I got to put on. And again, I am all about just going slow and steady. So that way I'm not changing my voice and changing my face and all the other things. So um, in it for the long haul. So hopefully like a solid amount of growth by then. And I'm really going to start focusing on my business. Like posing is where my passion is. So starting to grow that and help teach that to people, not just on a individual level, but even on a doubles level. Like Pete Hartwig and I did a really awesome routine that's going to come out probably here in the next few weeks that we got filmed while I was out there. And even just him and I, like we've been doing this forever and just doing that together, like our passion for it just got reignited so much brighter. So being able to build something to cultivate community with like the posing and artistry side of bodybuilding as well.
Well, before we wrap things up, what would you say is probably the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to posing in general? Not just division specific, but just when they first get started posing.
Just neglecting it completely and not realizing that, it is an art in itself, it's a craft in itself, and whatever you put into it, you're going to get out of it. So if you're waiting until those last 3 weeks to start posing and trying to get your presentation together, it's not going to look good. Like it just doesn't matter. Even the people that catch on to things really, really quick. It's something that if you're going to do bodybuilding, you have to realize like presenting your physique is a very, very big part of it. You can have somebody come in that's smaller than you and less balanced, but if they can present themselves better, they'll beat you in a heartbeat. Um, so just actually taking that and practicing it even in your off season, even when you don't have that show date picked yet.
No, that's definitely something. And like I think a lot of times people suffer like what you were talking about, where if you gain 10 more pounds, you wouldn't even want to pose anymore. Where a lot of people just don't understand that, like you said, you're not going to look like that 24/7 that you do. I mean, I've talked to people that pose every day, even in their off season. Just keeping up, it's just like its own muscle. Where the more times it gets used, the better you are. But you can never become a perfect poser, which is one thing that I think bothers. It bothers me just even thinking about that. Where it's like you can never be unless you're Janine Lankowski, but she's an outlier. Where we don't talk about that. But yeah, I mean, Robbi, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your journey with us. It was an absolute delight. And is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, mainly my coach. So he's like I said, I'm ride or die with him till the end. He's been my sounding board throughout the whole thing and been patient. And I think him and then even Kenny Wallach as well. Like he's been super helpful. And then on the artistic side of posing, like Kai Green. So he's been like I've been in his ear and been um, had the honor of kind of becoming one of his friends. And so when I send him stuff and ask for feedback, like I'll usually get something, and all of those things have made me a better athlete and artist. So
That is awesome. Yeah, I mean Kenny Walt, good God, how that man has any time on his hands, because I just know how many of my guests that he works with, and I've only probably scratched the surface of how many people he works with. I don't know what his time management skills are, but when I do eventually get him on, that's going to be the only thing that I ask him. I'm like, your answer's got to be an hour long because I need to know how you're able to do all this and get it done. So yeah, but again, everyone go and check her out on our Instagram page. I'll leave a link down below. Buyer beware, you will get inspired to get off that couch and stop eating all those Twinkies. But again, Robbi, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. This is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing off. Have a great day, everyone.